let's get the debate started. How did we get here and where do we go from here? One person who has sensed the shifting sands for some time is the leader of the Social Democratic Party, William Clouston. William, you're hoping to capitalise on the old lines of division being washed away.
To some extent we are, but I think it's partly just the way the world's turned. I think left and right actually still makes a lot of sense as a lens to look through. If you're talking about economics, I think it's very explanatory. I think what's happened basically over particularly the last 5 or 6 years, is that politics has taken a cultural turn, and that's actually very difficult to describe in a left-right way. It's more a sort of progressive, traditionalist way. And actually, it's interesting that we've been listening to the Afghanistan debate from Parliament, and that, I mean, how would you describe Afghanistan, your attitudes on that in left and right terms? Very difficult. Same with Brexit, actually, as you know.
Do you think it's destructive rather than constructive to create this two-party system, or at least a left-wing and a right-wing system that's becoming increasingly tribalised, where, you know, there are shouting matches between people who identify as being on the right wing against, you know, the liberal left, and people identify as being on the left wing against, you know, what they like to say is the far right?
I think that's a product of what I'm talking about, the cultural turn. I think, and as I say, I don't think it's, people talk about it in terms of left and right, and I don't. I think liberal, sort of hyper-liberal progressives are one side, and sort of more culturally based, you know, rooted traditionalists are on the other. So I think left and right are just the wrong terms for that. But if you're talking about, you know, do our political parties represent the present divides in society, I think no, not at all. I think the real divide in politics is between the sort of, you know, liberal and the social.
From where you stand, why do you think it is that Red Wall voters, once Labour voting loyalists, are now more likely to be ticking the box of the Conservative Party?
I think, Alex, the thing that explains that, I mean, that's been a problem for Labour for a long time, because Labour, again, because of this cultural turn, became a sort of liberal party. They wanted openness and open borders and open labour markets and things like that. And actually, even on the economics, that doesn't serve voters in Hartlepool very well. You know, if you're a worker in Hartlepool, you might want a little bit of protection, actually. And actually, the patriotism in the hinterlands always embarrasses Labour. You know, their values don't match. So it's not at all surprising to me that the Red Wall has sort of decided, actually, as a second best, we'll go for the Tories. But again, I think the Tories' economics are far too liberal for the Red Wall. So in that sense, it's not a good fit either. I think it's just a sort of second choice, really.
Do you think the fact that we have a first-past-the-post system, which seems to constantly secure either a Labour government or a Conservative government, considering the smaller parties struggle to be able to top the polls in a constituency and therefore take the seat, do you think that is helpful in the functioning of government, where there are just two parties and there aren't coalitions? Or do you think that's actually denying the general public real representation?
Oh, it certainly denies real representation. And actually, you won't get a better example of that than Brexit. Remember that the mainstream majority position, which you and I support, which is to leave the European Union, there wasn't a single party in Parliament that was elected to Parliament that supported that, apart from, I mean, you had Dougie Carswell there, but you had the DUP as the only party that had that as a policy. And that's a really quite a serious misalignment between the general public's view and the people sitting in Parliament. So, yeah, I mean, in that respect, we're strong supporters of voting reform. I think you won't get people being able to vote honestly until you have a prospect that, you know, the people you vote for can get into Parliament. So I think it's basically a rigged system, the one that we operate now. I think it should be opened up. If we got PR, we get a little bit of competition into Parliament and politics, which I think would be a good thing.
There are arguments of people saying when you allow too many people around the dinner table, it just becomes a giant screaming mess, that it takes so much longer for bills to pass through Parliament because coalition governments have to all agree. It's sometimes difficult to find a majority. Do you think that, you know, in that respect, Britain will perhaps continue to remain a first-past-the-post two-party system?
Well, to take the first part of your question first, I don't accept that it necessarily makes for instability. I mean, for a start, we haven't had a lot of instability. We haven't had a lot of stability in our politics recently anyway. With our present system, we had a coalition from 2010. But no, I think all you're doing is basically you've got to accept that the Labour Party is quite a large coalition, and the Tory Party is quite a large coalition. What's happening is that we've assembled these large things, and it's a sort of closed shop, and you've got to take your pick between the two. It's better actually to get the voters' view into Parliament and see what they think, and then form a government from there. And as I say, I think the fundamental question which all voters should think about is, do you honestly think we've been well governed over the last 20, 30, 40 years? I don't. I think we've been really quite poorly governed, and I think we can do better.
You're the leader of a minor party, a smaller party, fighting against the big beasts with all of their funding, with all of their prominence, with the way that the media tends to constantly only ever focus on what the Tories or Labour are saying and doing. How hard are you finding it to break into the mainstream? And are you particularly targeting one side or the other? And would you as a party identify as either being on the left or right?
Well, firstly, it is very difficult. I mean, I think if you're a minor party, it's difficult to get cut through. It's difficult to grow the party. But we have had a lot of success, and I think the key thing with us is to get the ideas right. Be clear about what you actually believe. And we believe that probably like about 50% of British people, that the best combination of policies is a combination of red and blue. And on the economics, we're left-leaning. I think people want reindustrialization. They want the government to intervene in the housing market. The housing crisis, which you talk a lot about on GB News, quite rightly, it won't be solved, but it cannot be solved by the market alone. You've got to get the state back involved, back in the business of building houses. And most people see that. But to give you a perfect example, both the Tories and the Labour Party have combinations of policy that can't possibly work. On housing, our policy is to build, get the state back into the business of building housing again, but also to reduce immigration. And actually, you can't have a successful solution to this problem unless you combine those two policies. So actually, the public's up for a blend of red and blue, and we're trying to provide that for people to vote for. I think one of the major problems that people have had is they go into the voting booth in election time and they think, who on earth am I going to vote for? Rather, like you said at the start.
Looking at Brexit, and looking at some of the headlines today where we're seeing staff shortages, a combination of both the pandemic and people going back to their home countries and not returning, and perhaps migrant workers after returning to their own countries not returning. One of the direct products of that is seeing a huge inflation in wages. And of course, it was largely blue-collar workers who were regarded, the left-behinds as they've been termed, regarded as being the people who got Brexit over the line. And yet we found that the Labour Party, by and large, apart from a few outriders, were vehemently against Brexit to the point of actually wanting a second referendum to reverse it. Does that surprise you?
It disappoints me, really. I mean, I'm not surprised. I think the Labour Party, just like the Tories, is basically a liberal type of party. And I think, again, one of the major problems that we've got is there's too much liberalism in power. You've got, both major parties are pretty liberal. You've got Liberal Democrats adding to that. And in the media, the broadcast media, as you know, is largely liberal left. The BBC is completely liberal left. Not very left, actually, pretty just liberal. And corporates are the same, universities are the same. So you've got liberalism everywhere. And people are crying out in the hinterland for a party that represents them. And you could call us red and blue combination. You could call us patriotic left or whatever. But they're crying out for someone to represent them. And for as long as that's the case, Alex, I think our prospects actually are rather good.
William, thank you ever so much for coming and kicking off this conversation. We're actually going to be leaving